Stephen Miller, who's the president's Homeland Security Advisor and Deputy Chief of Staff, went on Fox News and said, we're setting a goal, a minimum of 3,000 arrests for ICE every day. And President Trump is going to keep pushing to get that number higher and higher. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, thank you for appearing before us. It is your duty and mine, all of ours here, to protect our American homeland and our citizens, but to do so in a way that is legal, that is humane, that is effective, and principally constitutional. So let's get to that. Foundational to the administration's entire immigration agenda and to everything we've seen in the streets of Minneapolis and other cities across our country is your pursuit of higher and higher numbers for deportation, the mass deportations that Stephen Miller designed and President Trump has ordered you to implement. It's why we have roving patrols, racially profiling whomever they see and creating a show-me-your-papers state. It's why you go into sensitive locations like churches and hospitals and schools. It's why you've been arresting children, the elderly, refugees, the disabled, including a resident in my own state suffering from severe developmental disabilities. When there's pressure on you to hit high numbers, you don't have the time to focus on targeted effects to find violent criminals on the run. It's easier to simply round up people here breaking no laws and contributing to our communities. It's why you deny people due process and rush them out of the country. And it's why you've put poorly trained ICE recruits on our streets engaging in reckless and dangerous tactics. Does DHS, Madam Secretary, operate on any quotas or numerical targets for immigration arrests every day?
No, Senator, we do not. We do targeted law enforcement operations going after those worst of the worst criminals that are here illegally.
I would certainly prefer it if you did targeted operations against the worst of the worst. But just last year, Stephen Miller, who's the president's Homeland Security Advisor and Deputy Chief of Staff, went on Fox News and said, we're setting a goal, a minimum of 3,000 arrests for ICE every day. And President Trump is going to keep pushing to get that number higher and higher. He's the Deputy Chief of Staff and Homeland Security Advisor, and he oversees immigration policy for the president. What's your response to his public quote?
Sir, there is no quotas at the Department of Homeland Security. When we do law enforcement operations, we do them on targeted enforcement, getting public safety threats off of our streets and out of our communities to protect the American people.
Thank you. And you agree that setting quotas would actually put improper pressure on law enforcement to conduct themselves in ways that might not be in the best interest of their safety or the public?
Senator, we don't have any quotas on our law enforcement
operations. Have you
ever
issued any guidance rejecting the use of numerical targets or quotas?
I usually put out notices on things that are impacting our operations. There's been no discussion or requirement on numerical quota targets. Therefore, there would be no need to reject them in a memo unless I feared that they were being implemented, which they're not.
Here's why I think there might be real value in your putting out a memo saying, I reject any quotas. It's not just what Stephen Miller said last May. He's reportedly, and I have many press accounts of this I can submit for the record, making conference calls, berating agency officials, threatening to fire them, threatening to fire the leadership of field offices that are in the bottom 10% of arrest numbers. I would suggest that it's this constant drive for higher numbers that has been behind a lot of what we've been seeing in terms of the failure to actually focus on the worst of the worst and targeted enforcement, and to instead do things like roving patrols and profiling.
Just moments ago, inside the hearing room, a sharp exchange unfolded between Senator Chris Coons and Secretary Kristi Noem. A moment that cut directly into the heart of one of the most contentious debates in American public life today. Senator Coons did not circle around the issue. He asked a direct question. Does the Department of Homeland Security operate under deportation quotas? It was a question that carried far more weight than its few simple words. Because behind that question lies a larger concern about how power is exercised, how enforcement is directed, and whether government institutions are guided by principle or by pressure to produce numbers. In his remarks, Senator Coons framed the debate in moral and constitutional terms. Protecting the homeland, he said, is a duty shared by everyone in that chamber, but it must be done legally, humanely, effectively, and above all, constitutionally. That framing was not accidental. It was a reminder that national security and civil liberties are not opposing ideas in the American system. They are meant to exist together. Then came the central allegation. According to the senator, the administration's immigration strategy has been driven by an intense push for higher and higher deportation numbers. He pointed to reports, statements from senior officials, and public comments suggesting that immigration enforcement has been measured in daily totals, numbers that must be reached, targets that must be exceeded. and when Senator Coons pressed Secretary Noem with the key question, whether DHS operates under quotas or numerical targets for arrests, her response was immediate. No, Senator, we do not. The Secretary insisted that the department conducts targeted law enforcement operations, focusing on individuals who pose serious threats to public safety. According to her, enforcement decisions are driven by the goal of protecting American communities, not by numerical requirements. But the senator did not let the issue rest there. He pointed to a public statement from Stephen Miller, a senior advisor overseeing immigration policy, who reportedly described a goal of thousands of arrests per day, a number that, if accurate, would suggest a scale of enforcement tied to measurable output. And in Washington, numbers matter. Numbers shape expectations. Numbers shape internal pressure. And numbers can quietly influence the behavior of institutions tasked with carrying out federal policy. This is the deeper question that lingered in the room after the exchange concluded. If government agencies are encouraged, formally or informally, to meet arrest totals, what happens to discretion? What happens to judgment? Law enforcement in a constitutional republic is not meant to operate like a production line. Officers are trained to assess circumstances, evaluate evidence, and apply the law with careful judgment. The integrity of that system depends on the ability to make decisions based on facts, not quotas. That is precisely why Senator Coons raised the concern that numerical targets could create improper pressure on officers in the field. Pressure that might push enforcement away from careful investigation and toward speed, toward volume, toward the easiest arrests rather than the most urgent threats. Secretary Noem, for her part, firmly rejected the premise. She repeated that the Department of Homeland Security has no quotas, no numerical targets. And therefore, she argued, no need to issue formal guidance rejecting them. But even that answer reveals something deeper about the modern American political landscape. Because today's immigration debate is not simply about policy. It is about trust. Trust that agencies will enforce the law fairly. Trust that political pressure will not distort enforcement priorities. Trust that constitutional protections will remain intact even during moments of intense political division. These hearings exist for exactly this reason. They are one of the few mechanisms through which the legislative branch can question the executive branch directly, in public, on the record, under oath. In that hearing room, the exchange between a senator and a cabinet secretary may last only minutes, but those minutes matter. They reveal how leaders explain their actions, how they defend their policies, and how they respond when the foundations of those policies are challenged. For viewers watching across the country, this moment is a reminder that democracy is not quiet. It is not always comfortable. It is a system built on questions, difficult questions asked in the open. And sometimes the most important question is the simplest one. Is power being used responsibly? Tonight's exchange between Senator Chris Coons and Secretary Kristi Noem offered one more window into that question. A debate over enforcement, over accountability, over whether the machinery of government is driven by principle or by pressure. The answer may continue to unfold in hearings like this one, where elected officials confront the realities of policy face to face. Because in the end, democracy depends not only on laws written in statutes, but on the vigilance of those who question how those laws are carried out. And that responsibility does not belong only to those inside the chamber. It belongs to the public as well. Stay informed, stay engaged, and continue to demand transparency from those who hold power. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA and support our work to expose the truth.